clock ticked, a steady, monotonous pulse against the backdrop of Amelia's life. Each tick was a grain of sand slipping through the hourglass of another day in Porthaven. Rain lashed against the window pane, blurring the already dreary view of the grey harbor. Amelia sighed, the sound swallowed by the rhythmic drumming. She stirred her lukewarm tea, the weak brew doing little to dispel the chill that had settled deep in her bones. Porthaven was always damp, always grey, always the same. Downstairs, the bell above the door of the curio shop tinkled, announcing a customer. Amelia braced herself. Most were tourists, looking for something authentically Porthaven, a phrase she had grown to despise. They wanted quaint, they wanted charming, they wanted a postcard-perfect version of a town that was slowly rotting from the inside out. They never truly saw Porthaven. She descended the creaking stairs, the familiar scent of dust, old paper, and sea salt filling her nostrils. The shop was crammed with forgotten things, relics of Porthaven's past nautical maps faded with age, tarnished silver lockets, chipped porcelain dolls with unsettlingly blank eyes. These objects, once vibrant and full of life, now echoed the town's slow decline. A woman stood near the back, examining a collection of antique telescopes. Her hair, the color of burnished copper, was pulled back in a severe bun. Her coat was the color of raven's wings, and her eyes, when she turned towards Amelia, were an unusual shade of violet. "Interesting collection," the woman said, her voice low and smooth. "Do any of these still function?" Amelia shrugged. "Do any still function?" Amelia shrugged. "Most likely not. They're more for display. Sentimental value, you know." The woman ran a gloved hand over the brass casing of a particularly large telescope. "Sentimental value doesn't do much good when you need to see something far away." Amelia felt a prickle of irritation. This wasn't the typical tourist. There was something about this woman, a sharpness, an intensity that unsettled her. "Depends on what you're looking for," she retorted. A little sharper than she intended, the woman turned her violet gaze on Amelia, and for a moment, Amelia felt as though she were being dissected, her life laid bare under that intense scrutiny. "I'm looking for something that's been lost," she said finally, her voice barely a whisper. "Something important." Amelia scoffed, a bitter sound. "Aren't we all?" The woman didn't reply, but her gaze lingered on Amelia, holding a weight of expectation, a glimmer of something Amelia couldn't quite decipher. Then she turned back to the telescopes, the rain outside intensifying its relentless drumming, and Amelia was left with a strange, unsettling feeling, a sense that the ordinary rhythm of her life in Porthaven had been irrevocably disrupted. The clock ticked on, but now its rhythm felt like a countdown. The curio shop, usually a haven of musty smells and forgotten stories, felt suffocating. The violet-eyed woman's words still echoed in the silence left behind, vibrating off the chipped teacups and tarnished silver lockets. Amelia found herself unable to return to her task of dusting the grandfather clock. The rhythmic tick-tock, now a relentless drumbeat against her temples. Something important, something far away. The phrases clung to her, insidious and persistent. She wandered to the window, rain still lashing Porthaven, blurring the already indistinct outlines of the dilapidated buildings across the street. It was a landscape she knew intimately, a landscape she had always accepted. But now, through the filter of the woman's unsettling visit, it seemed to press in on her, a cage of gray stone, and perpetual damp. For the first time, Amelia felt a real, visceral aversion to the shop, Porthaven, to the predictable, unchanging nature of her life. That night, sleep offered little escape. Dreams, usually a jumbled mess of antique dolls and misplaced invoices, were now dominated by the woman's violet eyes, staring at her from a swirling vortex of stars. Amelia woke with a gasp, her heart hammering against her ribs, a sheen of cold sweat clinging to her skin. The dream, unlike any she'd had before, left her feeling strangely hollow, as if a piece of her had been pulled away, leaving a gaping void. The following day, a crow landed on the windowsill, its obsidian eyes mirroring the intensity of the woman's gaze. It held in its beak a small, tightly rolled parchment, tied with a faded crimson ribbon. Amelia hesitated, a prickle of unease crawling up her spine. Crows were common in Porthaven, scavenging scraps and adding to the overall air of decay. But this felt different, deliberate. Slowly, she reached for the parchment, her fingers trembling slightly. The crow remained motionless, its beady eyes fixed on her. Untying the ribbon with numb fingers, she unfurled the brittle paper. Written in elegant looping script were 2 words: "Seek Havenwood." Havenwood, the name was familiar, a whisper on the edge of memory. She vaguely recalled her grandmother mentioning it once, a story about a place beyond Porthaven, a place of ancient trees and forgotten magic. But her grandmother had dismissed it as a fairy tale, a way to keep a restless child occupied. Now, staring at the stark words on the parchment, Amelia knew it was anything but. The woman, the dream, the crow, the message, it was all connected. A path, previously hidden, was now laid bare before her. Fear, cold and insistent, threatened to paralyze her, to keep her rooted in the familiar decay of Porthaven. But beneath the fear, a spark flickered, a fragile ember of curiosity, a desperate yearning for something more than the monotonous routine of her life. The call had been issued, and against all logic, against the suffocating weight of her fear, Amelia knew she couldn't ignore it. The curio shop, with its dust and its secrets, suddenly felt less like a haven and more like a tomb. It was time to leave. The crow's feather, slick with rain and soot, lay on the counter beside the note. Amelia picked it up, the oily sheen sticking to her fingertips. Havenwood, the message read, scratched onto parchment that felt unnaturally old. She knew with a bone-deep certainty that Havenwood wasn't just a place. It was a precipice. But the thought of actually going, the mere suggestion, felt like a rogue wave threatening to capsize the fragile little boat that was her life. Porthaven, for all its gray misery, was safe, predictable. Here she knew the rhythm of the rain, the precise creak of the shop's floorboards, the musty scent of forgotten artifacts. She knew what was expected of her: dust, polish, haggle, repeat. She pictured Havenwood, the image ripped from the edges of her grandmother's faded stories, bloomed in her mind. Ancient trees twisted into impossible shapes, sunlight filtering through leaves of spun gold, whispers carried on the wind. Fairy tales. She hadn't believed in fairy tales since she was a child. They were for dreamers, for fools who didn't understand the harsh reality of Porthaven. Havenwood meant leaving the curio shop, leaving behind the weight of her family's expectations, the generations of dust she'd inherited, leaving behind the familiar comfort of her routine. even if that routine felt like a slow, agonizing suffocation. That violet-eyed woman, Amelia shivered. The woman's visit had cracked something inside her. Yes, stirred a longing for something more than Porthaven's gray shores. But was that longing worth uprooting her entire life? Was it worth the risk? What if Havenwood was nothing more than a delusion? What if, after all that upheaval, she found only disappointment and further loss? She imagined herself stumbling, lost and alone through a forest she didn't understand, hunted by shadows she couldn't see. Better the devil, you know. She could unpack the crates of recently acquired pottery, catalog the new batch of tarnished silver, and simply forget about the crow, the message, Havenwood, and the unsettling woman with eyes like amethyst fire. She crumpled the note, the parchment resisting her grasp. She could tell herself it was just a prank, a cruel joke played by someone who knew her grandmother's stories. She could convince herself the violet-eyed woman was simply eccentric, a harmless wanderer with a penchant for the peculiar. Amelia smoothed the crumpled note. She knew she was lying. Havenwood wasn't a prank. The woman wasn't harmless. And deep down, a small voice, persistent and insistent, whispered that she had a choice to make. A choice between the comfortable cage of Porthaven and the terrifying, exhilarating possibility of something more. She grabbed the dust rag, its familiar texture rough against her skin. Today she would dust, tomorrow she would polish. And Havenwood? Havenwood could remain lost in the pages of her grandmother's stories, a forgotten fairy tale for another time. She would stay here, safe and predictably miserable in Porthaven. The thought settled on her like a leaden blanket, heavy and suffocating, but it was a familiar weight, a weight she knew how to carry. She'd rather carry that than face whatever lurked in Havenwood. The weight of unmade choices hung heavier than usual the next morning. Amelia swept the dusty floor of the curio shop, the familiar scent of beeswax and forgotten dreams doing little to soothe the gnawing unease in her gut. She avoided looking at the crow-shaped paperweight on the counter, the one that had held down the message she'd now crumpled and tossed into the perpetually overflowing waste bin. Havenwood. The word felt like a splinter beneath her skin. The bell above the door chimed, announcing a customer. It was old Mr. Hemlock, come to complain about the price of antique thimbles again. Amelia forced a smile, but her heart wasn't in it. Even the predictable ritual of haggling with the old man felt hollow, a cheap imitation of a life. As Mr. Hemlock finally shuffled out, grumbling about modern greed, Amelia slammed the closed sign onto the door with more force than necessary. She needed air, needed to be away from the suffocating confinement of the shop. She found herself, almost without conscious decision, walking towards the edge of Porthaven, where the town bled into the whispering woods. The air here tasted different, cleaner, tinged with the scent of pine and damp earth. She walked further, the crumbling houses giving way to gnarled trees, their branches clawing at the sky. Deeper and deeper she went, past the point where the familiar paths faded, until she stood in a small clearing, bathed in an ethereal light that filtered through the canopy. In the center of the clearing sat a woman. Not just any woman, but the woman with violet eyes. She was seated on a moss-covered log, her posture regal, her gaze fixed on Amelia. The air crackled with an unseen energy, and Amelia felt a tremor run through her bones. "You came," the woman said, her voice a low, melodic hum that resonated deep within Amelia's chest. It wasn't a question, but a statement of fact. Amelia swallowed, her throat suddenly dry. I don't know why. I was just walking. The woman smiled, a slow, knowing smile that sent a shiver down Amelia's spine. Destiny has a way of guiding lost souls. You received my message, didn't you? Amelia remained silent, the crumpled paperweight flashing in her mind. It doesn't matter, the woman continued, her eyes twinkling with amusement. What matters is that you are here. I am Elara, and I've been expecting you. She gestured to the space beside her on the log. Hesitantly, Amelia approached and sat down, feeling the damp moss seep through her thin dress. Elara turned to face her, her violet eyes piercing and yet strangely comforting. Porthaven has been a prison for you, child. A gilded cage built on routine and regret. You have gifts, talents that are withering away in this place. Gifts that need to be nurtured, honed. Amelia scoffed, a bitter sound in the tranquil clearing. Gifts? What gifts could I possibly have? I sell dusty trinkets to tourists. Elara's smile widened. The ability to see beyond the surface, to sense the history woven into objects, to hear the whispers of forgotten magic. You have it, Amelia. You simply haven't learned to use it. She reached out, her hand surprisingly warm and smooth against Amelia's trembling one. Havenwood awaits you. It is a place of wonder, of learning, of power, but it is also a place of danger, of trials. Will you come with me? Will you embrace your destiny? The air hung thick with anticipation. The forest seemed to hold its breath. For the first time in her life, Amelia felt a spark ignite within her, a flicker of hope that threatened to consume the suffocating darkness that had enveloped her for so long. This was it, the choice she had been trying to avoid. But Elara's hand in hers felt like a lifeline, a bridge across the chasm of her fear. She looked into those violet eyes and saw not just wisdom, but a deep and abiding belief in her. Amelia took a shaky breath. Yes, she whispered, the word barely audible. Yes, I'll go. The cobbled path ended abruptly where the woods began, a gnarled and tangled mess of ancient trees that seemed to lean in, daring her to enter. Amelia stood on the precipice, the familiar smell of brine and dust from Porthaven clinging to her clothes like a shroud. Behind her, the last rays of the setting sun painted the drab buildings a fleeting, deceptive gold. Before her, only shadows and the rustling whisper of unseen things. She glanced back at the town, at the curio shop with its dusty windows, and the life she had known, or rather, endured. A life of routine, of predictable grays, a life she thought she wanted. But the thought felt as foreign and hollow as a dried-out shell. Havenwood, the word echoed in her mind, a vibrant counterpoint to Porthaven's muted existence. Taking a deep breath, she stepped off the path, the hard stones giving way to soft, yielding earth. The air immediately changed, thick with the scent of damp leaves, pine needles, and something else, something wild and untamed that tickled at the back of her throat. It was a scent of possibility, laced with a sharp, unsettling tang of fear. Elara emerged from the trees, a silent guardian. Her violet eyes, even in the fading light, seemed to hold the secrets of the forest, of Havenwood itself. She offered a small, knowing smile, a silent encouragement. Amelia looked at her, at the unyielding certainty in her gaze, and felt a tremor of something akin to courage. Trees loomed, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching out to grasp her. The shadows danced and writhed, playing tricks on her eyes, turning familiar shapes into monstrous figures. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves, sent a jolt of adrenaline through her veins. Doubts gnawed at her, whispering insidious suggestions. "Turn back, it's not too late. You don't belong here." But each doubt was met with a stronger, more insistent counterpoint yearning, a flicker of hope ignited by Alara's words and the promise of Havenwood. It was a faint ember, almost extinguished by fear, but burning nonetheless. Alara moved forward, beckoning her deeper into the woods. Amelia hesitated for a moment longer, her hand hovering over the rough bark of a nearby tree, a final connection to the world she knew. Then, with a sudden decisive movement, she pulled her hand away and followed. The path ahead was barely discernible, a mere suggestion of a trail winding through the undergrowth. The air grew colder, the shadows deeper. The sounds of Porthaven faded behind her, replaced by the cacophony of the forest, the chirping of unseen insects, the hooting of distant owls, the rustling of creatures in the undergrowth. As she walked, the familiar weight of Porthaven seemed to lift from her shoulders. The apathy that had clung to her for so long began to dissipate, replaced by a tentative curiosity, a cautious optimism. She was leaving behind the cage of her past, stepping into the unknown, into a world of possibilities and perils. Forest was a threshold, a gateway between the life she had lived and the life she was meant to lead. With each step, she crossed deeper into its embrace, leaving behind the safety of the known and embracing the terrifying, exhilarating uncertainty of Havenwood. The journey had begun. The forest air tasted of damp earth and secrets. Alara moved with the grace of a shadow, leading Amelia deeper into the emerald labyrinth. The first test presented itself quickly. A chasm cleaved the forest floor, spanned only by a decaying rope bridge that groaned under the slightest breeze. Alara offered no help, only a knowing look. Amelia, heart hammering against her ribs, took a tentative step onto the bridge. The wood swayed precariously, threatening to spill her into the murky depths below. She focused on a single knot in the rope ahead, willing herself forward, each step a victory against her own trembling fear. She crossed, breathless, feeling a flicker of pride amidst the lingering terror. Days blurred into a rhythm of trials. A torrential downpour tested her endurance, a cunning riddle challenged her wit, and a thicket of thorns guarded by nocturnal creatures tested her resolve. Alara remained a stoic guide, offering cryptic advice and observing Amelia's struggles with detached amusement. It wasn't long before allies emerged. A mischievous sprite, with hair like spun moonlight, led Amelia through a disorienting fog, giggling at her stumbles. A grizzled old huntsman living in a hidden cabin shared his knowledge of the forest's hidden paths and the language of its creatures, teaching Amelia to track, to listen, to survive. He gave her a small carved wooden bird, telling her it would always point her toward true north. But the journey also spawned enemies. Gruff, lumbering Grolic, creatures of bark and stone, blocked their path, demanding tribute. Amelia, remembering the huntsman's lessons, used her wits instead of brute force, tricking them with a clever illusion created with light and shadow, earning their grudging respect as she slipped past. Then there was Silas, a gaunt sorcerer with eyes like chips of ice, who craved the power he sensed within Amelia. He tried to lure her with promises of ease and influence, offering a shortcut to Havenwood in exchange for her loyalty. Elara warned her against Silas' honeyed words. His power was born of darkness, and association with him would corrupt her very soul. Amelia refused. Silas's face contorted in fury, and he unleashed a wave of dark magic. Elara shielded her, deflecting the blast with a shimmering barrier. They fled, pursued by the sorcerer's relentless hounds, their baying echoing through the trees. Amelia ran, adrenaline coursing through her veins, the wooden bird digging into her palm, a constant reminder of the path she had chosen. The forest was no longer a fairy tale backdrop, but a battleground, and Amelia, the once timid shopkeeper, was finding a strength within herself she never knew existed. The true test had only just begun. The air grew thick with the stench of decay, not unlike Porthaven, but this was different. This was the death of something wild, untamed. Trees clawed at the sky, their branches skeletal and devoid of leaves, the ground beneath a carpet of brittle brown needles. Silence pressed down, suffocating, broken only by the frantic thumping of Amelia's own heart. Silas' shadow stretched long and menacing before them, cast by the sickly green glow emanating from Havenwood's perimeter. It was no verdant sanctuary, as her grandmother's stories described. The air thrummed with a discordant energy, a chaotic symphony of corrupted magic. The barrier, once a shimmering curtain of life, was now a pulsating membrane of darkness, spitting sparks of tainted energy. Elara, her violet eyes reflecting the sickly green, stopped Amelia at the edge of the corrupted forest. "This is it, Amelia." The inmost cave, fear, cold and sharp, threatened to paralyze her. She wanted to turn back, to run all the way back to the familiar gloom of Porthaven, to the predictability of the curio shop. But the memory of Elara's unwavering belief, the faces of the people Silas had enslaved, pushed her forward. Before them lay a narrow path, barely visible beneath the rotting leaves. The air shimmered with an invisible barrier, and Amelia could feel the weight of Silas' power pressing against her mind. A whisper promising oblivion. Elara pulled a small tarnished silver locket from beneath her cloak, the one Amelia had seen around her grandmother's neck in old photographs. "This will protect you, somewhat." Elara's voice was tight with concern. "But Silas has woven a web of illusions within. You must trust your instincts, Amelia. Trust what feels right, not what appears to be." Amelia took a deep breath, the fetid air burning her lungs. "And if I fail?" Elara's eyes were filled with a sorrow Amelia couldn't comprehend. "Then Havenwood and all its magic will be lost forever." Elara placed the locket around Amelia's neck. A jolt of energy surged through her, a fragile shield against the oppressive darkness. The silver felt cold against her skin, a small, tangible promise of hope in this wasteland. With a nod, Amelia stepped onto the path. The air crackled around her, and the world shimmered, blurring the line between reality and nightmare. Twisted faces leered from the gnarled trees, whispering temptations and threats. The path stretched endlessly, a labyrinth of shadows and deceit. She pressed on, the locket a constant reminder of the weight of her task. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, preying on her doubts and fears. Silas was inside her head now, probing, testing, seeking to break her. He promised her safety. All she had to do was turn back. But then, a flicker of memory, her grandmother's voice, warm and loving, telling stories of Havenwood, of its power to heal and protect. A vision of Elara's determined face, fueled by a hope that echoed her own. And finally, the image of Silas, his cruel eyes gleaming with malice, the architect of this desolation. Amelia clenched her fists. The path ahead remained shrouded in darkness. The destination unknown. For the first time, she felt a surge of genuine conviction. She would not break. She would not yield. She would face Silas, and she would reclaim Havenwood. The journey had just begun. The air hung thick and heavy, a suffocating blanket woven from the stench of decay and the oppressive silence of Havenwood. Each breath tasted like ash and damp earth, a constant reminder of the rot that had taken root. Amelia, locket clutched tight in her trembling hand, pushed open the skeletal remains of what must have once been grand, ornate gates. The wood crumbled at her touch, a dark powder clinging to her skin. Inside, the trees, once towering guardians, were now twisted parodies of themselves. Their branches, gnarled and blackened, clawed at the sky like skeletal fingers. The leaves, if they could even be called that, were brittle, brown, and hissed ominously with every slight breeze. The ground beneath her feet was no longer mossy and yielding, but a treacherous bog of bubbling mud and festering fungi. The deeper Amelia ventured, the more palpable the corruption became. She could feel it seeping into her, a cold, insidious tendril wrapping around her heart. Strange, distorted creatures lurked in the shadows, their eyes glowing with malevolent hunger. They weren't animals, not anymore. They were something else, something warped and twisted by the darkness that permeated the wood. One night, huddled beside a meager fire she'd managed to coax to life, Amelia was ambushed, not by a twisted creature, but by a group of humans, Silas's followers. Their faces were gaunt, their eyes hollow, filled with a chilling zealotry. They moved with a predatory grace, their weapons glinting in the firelight. Amelia fought with a ferocity she didn't know she possessed, her instincts honed by weeks in the wilderness. But they were too many, too strong. She felt a searing pain in her arm as a blade sliced through her defenses. Captured and dragged before Silas, Amelia found herself in the heart of the corruption, a ruined glade, where a once sacred pool had been transformed into a swirling vortex of black, oily water. Silas was everything she had imagined and more. His eyes burned with a chilling intelligence, his face etched with lines of cruelty and ambition. He circled her like a predator, his voice a silken whisper that promised power and offered oblivion. He tested her, probing her mind with insidious whispers, showing her visions of a world consumed by darkness, a world he would rule, a world where she could be his queen. He offered her a place by his side, a chance to share in his power. The temptation was almost unbearable, a siren song that threatened to drown her resolve. But then Amelia saw it, a flicker of fear in his eyes, a subtle hesitation in his voice. He was powerful, yes, but he was also vulnerable. He was afraid of something. She focused on the locket around her neck, the warmth of it against her skin, a reminder of Elara's faith, and the hope for Havenwood. Silas, Sensing her resistance, grew enraged. He unleashed his full power, a torrent of dark magic that slammed into her, threatening to shatter her mind and body. She screamed, the pain almost unbearable, but she held on, her will the only thing standing between her and annihilation. She had to endure. She had to find his weakness. She had to survive. For Havenwood, for herself, for a future she wasn't even sure existed anymore. As his assault reached its peak, Amelia saw a small, almost imperceptible crack in his armor, a flicker of pain in his eyes when she concentrated on the locket. It was a lifeline, a fragile thread of hope in the face of overwhelming darkness. It was the key to her survival, and perhaps to Havenwood's salvation. The ordeal had just begun. The air in Silas' lair thrummed with a chaotic energy, a discordant symphony of dark magic that clawed at Amelia's skin. Silas, wreathed in shadows that writhed like living things, threw back his head and laughed, a sound that echoed unnervingly through the cavernous space. He gestured with a long, skeletal hand, and the ground beneath Amelia's feet shifted, revealing a chasm filled with churning purple mist. "Admire the fruits of my labor, little shopkeeper," Silas boomed, his voice a rasping wind. "Havenwood, reborn in my image. Its power, mine to command." Amelia stood firm, her breath catching in her throat, but her eyes, hardened by the journey, remained fixed on Silas. She felt the magic within her, a quiet hum beneath her skin, responding to the corrupted energy around her. It wasn't the time to be afraid. Silas unleashed a torrent of dark energy, bolts of crackling purple that ripped through the air towards her. Amelia didn't hesitate. Closing her eyes, she reached for the magic within, drawing it upwards, weaving it into a shield of shimmering emerald light. The dark energy slammed against the shield, momentarily obscuring her vision, but the shield held, strengthened by her will, by the memory of the whispering trees, by the faces of her allies, by the very hope of Havenwood. The battle was a dance of light and shadow, a desperate struggle for control. Silas, enraged by Amelia's resistance, hurled spells with increasing ferocity, each one designed to shatter her resolve, to break her spirit. Amelia, fueled by a growing understanding of her own power, parried, dodged, and deflected, drawing strength from the very land she sought to protect. The forest, however corrupted, it remembered its true nature, and its memory flowed into her, guiding her, bolstering her. Then she saw it, a chink in Silas' armor, a moment of wavering concentration, a flicker of fear in his eyes. He was weakening, his control slipping, his power waning. This was her chance. Focusing all her remaining strength, Amelia gathered the emerald energy around her, channeling it into a single, blinding beam. She unleashed it with a scream, a cry of defiance, a promise of rebirth. The emerald beam struck Silas, tearing through his defenses, piercing the veil of shadows that surrounded him. A blinding flash filled the lair. When Amelia could see again, Silas was gone, his laughter replaced by a desolate silence. The dark energy that had permeated the air began to dissipate, replaced by a gentle, soothing warmth. The churning mist in the chasm subsided, revealing not an abyss, but a pool of pure, shimmering water. Exhausted but triumphant, Amelia staggered forward, drawn to the water. As she knelt beside it, she saw her reflection, but it wasn't just her own face staring back. Overlaid upon it were the faces of the trees, the animals, the spirits of Havenwood, all whispering their gratitude. The pool rippled, and from its depths a single, perfect flower bloomed, its petals of vibrant, life-affirming green. Amelia reached out and plucked the flower, its stem cool and smooth against her skin. As she held it aloft, a wave of pure, unadulterated magic washed over her, healing her wounds, replenishing her strength, and filling her with an overwhelming sense of peace. The darkness was gone. Havenwood was safe. The flower was hers, the emblem of Havenwood's renewed life and its trust in her. The corrupted forest had its chance to recover. The journey was complete. The flower, a vibrant bloom of sapphire and silver, pulsed softly in Amelia's palm. She turned to leave Silas's crumbling fortress, but a wave of dizziness crashed over her. The victory suddenly soured by exhaustion and the weight of what she'd done. Her leg throbbed, a souvenir from a near miss with Silas's twisted vines, and the raw magic still crackling in her veins felt like a live wire humming beneath her skin. The journey back was a gauntlet of echoes. Every rustle in the recovering undergrowth seemed to whisper Silas' name. Every shadow held the memory of his cruel magic. Fear, a constant companion during her time in Havenwood, clung to her still, whispering insidious doubts. Had she truly defeated him? Or was this merely a respite? A lull before a darker storm? Ilara was gone, vanished as suddenly as she'd appeared, leaving only a lingering scent of ozone and violets. Amelia missed her guidance, her quiet confidence. Now it was just her, the flower, and the long, arduous trek out of the corrupted forest. The reformed pathways felt alien beneath her feet. Where once thorny vines had clawed, now soft moss grew. Where once grotesque creatures had lurked, small, timid animals peeked from the trees. The change was palpable, yet Amelia struggled to reconcile this vibrant rebirth with the horrors she had witnessed. The images were burned into her mind. The twisted trees, the petrified creatures, the sorrow in the eyes of the dryads she had freed. One evening, huddled by a dwindling fire, Amelia awoke to find herself surrounded. Not by enemies, but by the dryads, their faces etched with gratitude. They offered her berries, sweet and tart, and wove protective charms into her hair. For the first time since defeating Silas, Amelia felt a sliver of hope pierce the gloom. She wasn't alone. Havenwood remembered her, even if she struggled to reconcile her actions with the woman she once was. The journey continued, each step a testament to her newfound strength. She used the knowledge gleaned from Silas' lair to navigate the most treacherous routes, her control over the returning magic growing with each passing day. She healed injured animals, guided lost travelers, and soothed the land's wounds. Yet, the closer she got to the border of Havenwood, the more she felt the pull of Porthaven, the familiar ache of her old life threatening to resurface. The edge of the forest shimmered, a hazy curtain separating the world she had changed from the world she had left behind. As she stepped across the boundary, the magical flower pulsed warmly in her hand, a reminder of the power within her, a beacon against the encroaching darkness of doubt. The familiar grayness of Porthaven seemed to press down on her, heavier than before. The town hadn't changed, but she had. And she knew, with a certainty that resonated deep within her soul, that she could never truly return. The weight of Silas's defeat pressed down on Amelia. heavier than the forest floor beneath her worn boots. Havenwood, though bathed in the nascent glow of restored life, still held the echo of his cruelty. The magical flower, clutched tightly in her hand, pulsed with a gentle warmth, a constant reminder of the battle fought and the victory won, but also of the sacrifices made and the darkness witnessed. Exhaustion clung to her like a shroud. Every muscle ached, every breath a reminder of the magical expenditure, the strategic prowess, and that feeling when she had to dig deeper than ever before. She looked at Alara, whose violet eyes held an unreadable depth. "What now?" Amelia asked, her voice raspy, a mere whisper against the revitalized sounds of the forest. Alara smiled. "A rare and radiant thing? Now you decide. The power of Havenwood is within you, Amelia, but its destiny and yours are not fixed." Amelia looked back toward the twisted path that led back to Porthaven, a path back to the curio shop, the endless dusting of trinkets, the predictable rhythm of a life she now realized was a slow, agonizing suffocation. Her grandmother's stories swirled within her, no longer just fantastical tales, but blueprints for a life she could now forge. The locket, warm against her chest, seemed to hum with anticipation, but the temptation was insidious. The familiar comfort, the absence of responsibility, the promise of a life without constant peril, it tugged at her, a siren's call of mediocrity. A vision flashed in her mind. Silas's twisted face, the despair in the eyes of the corrupted creatures, the fear she had felt as his magic crashed against her defenses. Could she truly turn her back on the knowledge she had gained? The power she now wielded? Could she simply return to a life devoid of meaning, knowing that the world beyond Porthaven was still vulnerable to darkness? Amelia closed her eyes. She pictured the flower glowing in her palm, a symbol of hope, of resilience, of rebirth. It was a reminder that even from the deepest corruption, life could bloom anew. And she, Amelia, had been the catalyst. Opening her eyes, she felt a surge of strength, a fierce determination that chased away the last vestiges of doubt. The exhaustion remained, but it was now fueled by purpose, not despair. She looked at Alara, a new light in her own eyes. "I can't go back," she said, her voice stronger now, resonating with conviction. "Not yet. There's still work to be done." Turning her back on the path to Porthaven, Amelia stepped deeper into Havenwood. The forest responded, the trees seeming to lean in, welcoming her. But she knew, with a certainty that burned brighter than any magical flame, that she was no longer the timid shopkeeper. She was a protector, a guardian, a force for good. Silas had tried to break her, to bind her to his darkness, but in the crucible of Havenwood she had been reborn. The weight of the flower pressed against Amelia's palm, a tangible representation of the rebirth of Havenwood, but the triumph felt hollow, overshadowed by the insidious whisper that still slithered in the back of her mind. Silas' influence, though diminished, hadn't been completely eradicated. It clung to her, a seductive promise of a simpler life, a life without responsibility, without danger, without the endless burden of Havenwood. She walked for days, retracing her steps through the now vibrant forest. Sunlight dappled through the leaves, painting the once shadowed path in hues of gold and emerald. The air hummed with life, the songs of birds and the murmur of unseen creatures, a constant reminder of the beauty she had fought to protect. But the whispers persisted, growing louder as she neared Porthaven. "Come back," it hissed, a voice that sounded disturbingly like her own. "Come back to the quiet, to the predictable. This is too much. You were never meant for this." She saw it then through the trees, the dull gray rooftops of Porthaven, the familiar grime that clung to every surface. The scent of brine and stale fish, once an annoyance, now felt like a perverse comfort. The closer she got, the more appealing the idea became. To hand over the flower, to tell Alara she couldn't do it, to slink back into the anonymity of her old life. No more battling monstrous creatures, no more agonizing choices, no more fear. Just the comforting routine of the curio shop, the mundane conversations with tourists, the predictable rhythm of rain against the windows. She stood at the edge of Havenwood, the flower drooping slightly in her hand. The whispers intensified, painting vivid images of her old life. The comforting weight of coins in her apron pocket. The satisfying click of the shop door closing at night. The dull ache in her feet after a long day of sorting trinkets. Ahead, the road to Porthaven beckoned, a well-worn path leading back to the life she knew. Behind her, Havenwood shimmered, alive and vibrant, but demanding. Doubt gnawed at her. Was she strong enough? Did she truly have what it took to protect this place? Maybe Silas was right. Maybe she was just a simple shopkeeper, out of her depth, playing a role she was never meant to fill. She looked down at the flower, its petals now trembling slightly. It was a symbol of hope, a testament to her victory, but also a constant reminder of the threat that still lingered. Silas was weakened, but not gone. He was waiting, lurking in the shadows, ready to exploit any weakness, any flicker of doubt. Closing her eyes, Amelia took a deep breath, summoning the memory of the ruined glade, the terror and determination that had surged through her as she faced Silas. And she remembered Alara's unwavering belief in her. She opened her eyes, the doubt receding, replaced by a steely resolve. The path to Porthaven still looked appealing, but it was an illusion. A siren song luring her back to a life that was no longer hers. Turning her back on the familiar gray town, she walked back into Havenwood. The whispers faded, replaced by the sounds of the forest, the rustling of leaves, the distant call of a bird. This was her home now. This was her responsibility, and she would not falter.